this week we are going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're going to have a couple different topics this week. The Dead Sea Scrolls. What do we know about this? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Woo, where'd you rip these off from?
I have my ways.
You got your
I
own stash.
teach here, I know.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
I'm a staff.
What do we know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Why are we talking about it now? There?
Well, you're talking about the interpretation has been done. The Dead Sea Scrolls, I suspect, could be in that same Greek, Koine Greek.
Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are in Hebrew.
Okay.
But we're going to talk about that. Yeah, so I like where you're going. There is an intersection here.
They are the oldest and closest. What they say is follows word for word of our Bible. Mm-hmm. So they say that it's so close that it's proves that we haven't changed the wording. That's exactly right. That's a summary that we're going to conclude here. Is that it's a great evidence. They are the oldest Hebrew manuscripts that we have in possession. Luana?
I was going to say, my husband and I went to Israel in the year 2000, and they had a special show about that, about this Dead Sea Scrolls, and we went to that, and we were going to go and see the actual things. They had them under some kind of glass with a certain light on them, you know.
Yeah.
And so we were going to go, but Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State, I think, at that time, and she was going somewhere in Israel, and they had.
So you had to shut it down?
We didn't get to go.
Oh, they had to shut her down. Yeah, I would love to see these. You can see great pictures. I'm going to share some here. There's some great pictures online. It's just as good as going, I think.
I always said, I really wanted to see those Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, I'd like to see them
Madeleine
too.
Albright kept me from it.
Yeah. That happens. They pop up every once in a while. Somebody ever thought over here? Let's get a hand someplace. Oh, it's all hand. No? So they are the oldest Hebrew manuscripts. Date to about 200 BC, somewhere around there. So the age, the date of these things is right smack in the middle of our time frame that we're talking about. That's when these looks like these originated. There are some that might go back 300, 400, 500 BC. So it's obviously whoever had possession of these at this time, around 200 BC or so, had possession of very old manuscripts too. So there's a wide range here. These are anywhere from 300 to 400 year range that these writings were created. They were discovered over about a 10-year period of time, starting in 1946, in this area called Qumran, the northern part of the Dead Sea. That's where they get their name from. And we'll see. This is a picture of the caves. There are, I think, about. Don't quote me on this, about 14 caves, I think, 11 or 14 caves, all throughout this area. You can see very desolate, very remote. You can see the caves up here in the rocks. Right? There are a lot of different caves. And in these caves, they found as many as 15,000 fragments that might make up around 400 different writings, but in thousands of fragments. So we got to think about this. We're talking about the 200-300 BC time frame. Writing that's 2,300 years old, written on, about 80% of it's written on parchment. So that's animal skin, vellum, parchment. In fact, in the Mosaic Law, it talked about how God's word was to be written on vellum, on parchment. Animal skin. That's kind of interesting. Think about that. Write it on something I created, right? It's very interesting. Not something you made. Write it on something I made. That's very interesting. So most of it's written on parchment. So that did survive pretty well. But again, it's in fragments. We're going to see some examples of that here in a minute. And some of it's written on papyrus. That really is just disintegrated. We're talking about, paper made from plants. That stuff is just disintegrated. And some of it's written on copper, tin. That's held up pretty good. Yes, sir.
When did they find the Dead Sea Scrolls?
About 1946 is when they made their first discovery.
7.
So from 46 to 56, about 10 years, a 10-year period of time, these were found all through this area in lots of different caves. Now you have to kind of think about what's happened in this time frame, not to get into the 20th century too much, but you've had some geopolitical changing. The nation of Israel was founded in 48. So now my understanding is, we're going to do a super in-depth study on the discovery of them, but this was in Jordanian territory. This is actually at that time was Jordan. There's been some wars fought in that neck of the woods, as you probably know, in the 20th century. And at some point, Israel gained possession of this land and gained possession of those caves and did more excavation and more exploration in there. And so some of the fragments are held in the Jordanian Museum. Most of them are in a museum in Israel. And then some of them are in the British Museum. The Brits always seem to get their hands on some of this stuff. Some of it's in England as well. So this period, if you think about this period of time in the Middle East, right, Israel, Jordan, there was a lot of conflict there. But there started to be some exploration there. And they discovered in these caves thousands of fragments, 2,000, 2,300 years old. A lot of them in clay jars, some of them wrapped, just something happened. Why were these things hidden away, these caves? That's the centerpiece of our conversation today, right? Why did this happen? Okay, so we're going to look at that in a second. But kind of what Annette said, somebody said over here, that this was a validation for us to have later on. Something really significant happened with these people in this 200 BC time frame that caused them to hide these things away. I wonder what happened to those people. Don't you love to know? Nobody ever went back. We find these things 2,200 years later, right? They never went back and got them.
Wasn't this the time period where the Romans were trying to basically take over the world and destroy everybody? Yeah. And wasn't there a settlement that, and I can't think of the name of it because I know, that were held up in this on this mount, and the Romans actually ended up building.
You're talking about Masada.
That's
Masada.
Yeah. So I
yeah.
think kind of maybe they were just always in turmoil, so they had hidden these, and then a lot of people were decimated.
Well, that's just it. I mean, there are several theories about who placed these here and why. If you look at the time frame that these writings go to, I believe they pin right in this intertestamental time frame when this Maccabean revolt thing was happening. We were talking about last week. That's my opinion. Now there are some folks that they say this might be something as a result of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. That was when Israel was really kind of crushed. So maybe this happened then. But these writings all go back to 200-300 BC, some 300-400 BC. That means these guys in 70 AD were running around with 500- or 600-year-old skulls. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe. Possibly. Yeah. I don't know why these guys living up here up here would have had possession of that stuff. But there are a lot of theories about how these got in there. But the time frame for the writings themselves date to the 200s BC time frame. So, so let's talk a little bit about what these are. So they're found in these caves at Qumran, in the west bank of the northern shore of the Dead Sea. And again, they're the oldest surviving Hebrew manuscripts. Most are written in Hebrew, some are written in Aramaic, although some have Latin and Arabic. So there's your tie to Rome, right? Why are these things in Rome? But we're going to look at this at the end of our day today. At this period of time, Rome is ascending. It's very possible Latin made its way over here, but predominantly they're Hebrew. Although most writings attributed between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, some date back to as far as the 8th or 9th century BC. So we're talking about the 700s or 800s in BC time frame. So very old, right? Owing to the poor condition, scholars have not been able to identify all the texts, but they've done a lot of good work here. And they generally fall into a few different categories. So, they've kind of categorized these out. About 40% of the copies are texts of the Hebrew scriptures, so the Hebrew Bible we have today. So about 40% contain those writings. Right? If you thought, anybody have like maybe a small little library in your house where you've got your Bibles and you've got maybe some Christian writings and some lesson plans, right? Do you have a little? We do, right? If you kind of look, we have a little bookshelf, and we've got some old Bibles there, and some song books, and some maybe some old books that I've done classes with, or some writings, by Christian writers, things like that. If something was happening to my religion, where it was getting stamped out, somebody's coming through and saying, we're going to make Christianity illegal, what would you do with that stuff? What would we do with that stuff? I'd scoop up all of it, right? I'd scoop up the song books, I'd scoop up the books that I bought online, the lesson plans, the Bibles. I'd scoop up all that stuff and bury it somewhere, right? Or hide it someplace. That's what happened. So this stuff that we found is a mix of all of that. It's not only the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, but it's a lot of other stuff too. There's things there like the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, the book of Tobit, the book of Sirach, some extra Psalms. There's all kinds of stuff in there, right? So it's somebody for 10 points and prize that shall be revealed later. What book in the Hebrew Bible is not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? There's one book in the Hebrew Bible that is not in there. You know what it is?
Esther.
Oh, man, good job. How'd you know that? Does a guess or did you just know that?
I've probably heard it somewhere.
That's good, yeah. So the book of Esther is not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but every other book is. That we could probably have a whole class conversation about that. Why do you think that is?
Male pride.
Well, here's the thing. Now I looked this up because I was very curious. I don't have an answer. I don't know the answer to this. Probably some rabbi scholars could probably give you an answer. It's in the Septuagint though. So if you look up the Septuagint, we talked about Septuagint a few different times. That was written somewhere around 250 BC. Okay, Septuagint was translated from Hebrew into Greek about 250 BC. Esther's in that. So they had it 100 years before, at least. So they had it. Why wouldn't it be in? Why did they hide that away? I don't know.
It's a woman book.
Oh, but they had all. But how did it get in? But it was in the canon already. You know what I mean? It was in the canon. I don't know. Isn't Esther the only book that doesn't mention God?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does not mention God.
Yes.
Maybe there's something there. I don't know. But it's very interesting. Very interesting. So, somebody have a thought? Somebody have a hand up? Yeah.
Well, also, it was set outside of that area.
It was in Persia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so did Daniel. Daniel took place in Babylon. So. But I don't know. I mean, there is thought that, well, this is because this was a Persian thing, but it does talk about God's people, and again, the Jews had it. It had been canonized. We know that. Right? It made it through that whole mechanism. It ended up in the Septuagint. So Jesus had it. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. And then the remainder, about 30%, are what we call sectarian manuscripts of previously unknown documents that shed lots of light on the beliefs and the practice and the customs of people of that time. So it's just a tremendous window into that culture and that time. So, I mean, what a fantastic time capsule, to be able to understand what was going on back then. So we're talking about the very northern part of Judea here, right up here on the top of the Dead Sea. And so what was the context here? Let's think about this. So we've talked about Alexander's empire breaking up. The Seleucids had come down, taking control of Judea down here. So you can see they're running that area down there. We talked about this guy. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus IV, Manifest of God, that's what he called himself. He decides around 167 that he's going to eliminate the Jewish religion. That you can't practice your Sabbath behavior, you can't have these meats set aside, you can eat everything. It's illegal to practice circumcision. We're going to put, you're going to turn your temple altar into an altar for Zeus. We're going to go out into all the different countryside and all these villages, and we're going to put Greek altars in there, and you're going to practice our religion, and we're just going to eliminate this Jewish religion once and for all. And so the cities seem to cooperate, goes out into the countryside. You know, he sends his people out in the countryside. He sends these magistrates out to enforce this. I mean, this is like imposed Hellenization. We're going to squish this thing and stamp it out. And there's this one small village. The magistrate shows up, forces them to build this altar, and then says, "Okay, we're gonna practice our religion today. This is what we're gonna do. Who wants to go first?" And a bunch of guys start looking at each other, and this one Jewish guy says, "Well, I'll do it." And he steps forward to do it. And this guy named Mattathias, he was a priest, the local village there. He steps forward and kills that guy, kills that Jewish guy. And then he kills the magistrate, the Greek. What do you think that does? Right? That starts this huge revolt, this huge revolution, basically, led by Judas Maccabee. They called him Maccabee, which was a nickname for the hammer. And this total war breaks out for about 30 years. Massive struggle in this area. This is the Seleucid kingdom about this time. So here we are, we're between 296. That's when they had control of that area there. So that's the backdrop within which somebody said, we got to hide this stuff. Right? In fact, Antiochus went in and tore down a bunch of walls to Jerusalem to make it more vulnerable. So you can see this sense of, hey, we got to really hide this stuff away. Right? We got to start locking up this stuff that's really valuable to us. It gets eliminated. We have manuscripts here that might, at this time, these manuscripts might go back 600 or 700 years. 600 or 700 year old manuscripts. I mean, that's getting close to David's time. That's within a couple hundred years of David. So this is really old stuff. We got to preserve this. This looks to me like what happened, right? So these guys are this is the backdrop within which this stuff is hidden away. You might have heard of the Great Isaiah Scroll. Really, one of the most valued treasures in this collection is almost a complete scroll of the book of Isaiah. This thing is, and it's exact. In fact, one of the real amazing things about how we can have confidence that the Bible is authentic and genuine and historically accurate. The Jews had a practice in later years called the Messianic practice, where they would actually, when they would copy a book, one of their books, they had a whole practice for numbering each letter and making sure each line is perfect, and just letter for letter copied over. That was their practice for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the result of that is really all that we have today. Whenever they would copy over an old manuscript, because the manuscript was getting old, they would then ceremoniously burn and bury the old manuscript. So we don't have any Hebrew manuscripts that go back earlier than about 800 AD. Those are the oldest Hebrew manuscripts we have, because they had this practice of copying it and destroying it. Right? They didn't keep old, tattered scriptures around. Right? So when you find this thing that goes back to 200 BC, something like that, and it's a copy of what these guys had been doing 1,000 years later, basically, that's pretty impressive. And so that gives evidence that this Messianic practice they had worked. Right? It really worked to preserve the scriptures. So, I mean, imagine just laying your eyes on that thing. This thing's ancient. Now, it's in a couple different pieces, right? And it's got some fragments missing here. But for the most part, it's pretty good. What do we know about Hebrew?
Right.
It reads right to that. See how the lines you can tell? Yeah, Jim?
Is that Masoretic instead of Messianic?
Masoretic is what I was going to say. I'm sorry. Did I say Messianic? I meant Masoretic. Masoretic. Thank you. Yeah, Masoretic. Yeah, so you can see this Hebrew is kind of interesting. The Great Isaiah Scroll. There's another second Isaiah Scroll, so there's a couple different of these. This one's not as complete as the other one, but you can just see how they've just kind of fallen apart because they're so old, you know. One good thing, it's sitting in a pretty dry area. You know, there's a reason why we park airplanes down in Tucson. You know, the dry climate keeps them pretty good. So, you know, if this had been the Nile region of Egypt or something, they would have just been incinerated. You know, anything like that.
I just want to say something kind of off topic. Parchment. Our Constitution is written on parchment.
Is it on parchment?
It is on parchment. And when I saw it, I was shocked because I was going to think it was like a paper, right? It's huge. I mean, huge, because they took tanned leather and did all these things. And it's huge. It's not small. And they keep it under special lights, like what she was saying. But it just makes me think, God told them to do it this way on purpose.
For a reason, yeah.
And He made sure that sooner or later we saw it again to remind us, you know, I am who I say I am.
Yeah, do it my way. I have a better way.
Yes.
Right? I know what I'm talking about. You know,
Yeah.
do it my way. Right? This is God. I mean, this is such a lesson in so many ways for us as followers. You know, just do it the way He says. He's thought about it. He knows what's best. You don't have a better way. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing how that you know that animal skin is gonna hold up, as opposed to we go out and we find some plants and we strip them together and make paper. I mean, it's cheaper and it's quicker, but yeah, it's just gonna fall apart. It's gonna disintegrate.
And look how long that held up.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of theories about, you know, where these came from and why. You know, we don't really know because the people they didn't. There's evidence of how these people lived back then, but it's kind of hard to pin down exactly who did it. Fragments from the book of Ecclesiastes, I think that's kind of interesting. I bet you'd have some real fun if you read Hebrew. Like a big puzzle. They've had some of these things that are in different... Again, when they put them away, they were old. They were falling apart. You know, have you ever seen something like that where the staples come out and the paper's falling apart and trying to which page is which? You know, I put page numbers on the bottom of that thing. You know, where they have page numbers, part numbers. It's fragmented. So you know, they're trying to put together this big puzzle. Yeah, thoughts about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, what a fantastic reinforcement mechanism I think we have today to go back and see, wow, this stuff really is real. It did exist. These people lived a long time ago. This isn't just a made-up story, you know. Yeah, Larry?
One thing was, when they were discovered, the scholars kept it secret, in fact, not a secret, but very restricted. And one person had a copy of all of them and said, this is foolish, and they released it. And they were able to print out the scrolls.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I haven't really, like I said, I didn't really study the history of the discovery of them, but there is something there, because I remember when I was a kid hearing about this explosion of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember that? Probably like late 60s, early 70s, this big explosion. These things were found back in the 40s. So, you know, it really was, remember, that part of the world was going through a lot of stuff back in the 50s and 60s, so who knows exactly what the machine was. Yeah, Jim?
The one that happened is that they were making a concordance. Like you have a concordance, you look up this word and it tells you where all you find. They were making a concordance on the computer. Well, what they did is they reversed it and they recreated the originals from the concordance. And that's what they were able to release. That's how they were able to get access to it, to release it.
Yeah, but you can actually see these in museums now. You can actually go and see them, you know, the real things today. Yeah, you go online. You can go online and see all this stuff. You can see these images. They're all taken from the library online. So, yeah, any other thoughts about what was going on? Yeah.
I heard, it was actually watching History Channel or something, but they're taking computers and taking pictures of all the fragments, and the computer saying that piece fits over here. Because there's so many fragments, but the computer, and I wonder if AI is going to be able to help as far as putting puzzles
Scanning
together.
it.
How many pieces did you say?
15,000.
15,000 pieces. The computer can keep up with that.
Yeah, and because I'm sure that, you know, there's not a piece that has this exact edge. No, it's not like I'm sure whatever this was doesn't look like that anymore. You know,
I think they're going to get better. I mean,
I
think they're going to figure a few more things out.
They probably will. Sick AI on
Well,
it.
they've even, because they're layered and glued together, computers can read through the layers now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a big article about that.
Yeah, we can scan and see if there's something
They
behind
scan
it.
the top of it, but they can, by printing and the different tones of light, they can actually go into the other layers as well.
Yeah.
Get the words off.
And there are some that are unreadable too. So there are some that just faded so much that it's not readable. So
Well, maybe AI can.
yeah, maybe it can. Yeah. But about 90% are parchment. About 8% or so are papyrus or paper. So some paper has survived, and about 1 to 2% are copper and tin, a mix of copper and tin. So that's kind of interesting. It's like trying to really that's like the hardback cover of the day. Make it on something sturdy.
Hard copy.
Yeah. So I thought, yeah. So interesting. It's kind of interesting to think about these and where they came from. What happened to these people? Something happened to them. Never went back. So sad story, but thank goodness they did this, right? Because here, 2,000 years later, it was done for us. Think about it. It really, I think, in the big picture, it was done for us, the people of this age, to find these just when we needed to find them, So it's just again the amazing work of God. They talk about this being the silent period. I don't know. It's screaming right there, isn't it? This period of time is just screaming out right now. It has something to say, Yes, Jim.
There were skeptics who claimed that some of the prophecies in the Old Testament were written in the New Testament time. They just wrote it as though it had been.
Yeah.
But then they find copies in the Dead Sea Scroll that's older than when they said it
Yeah.
was written.
Daniel's in there, Jeremiah's in there, Isaiah's in there, talking about the coming Messiah. Yeah. Yeah, that's what's amazing. But yeah, there's all this talk about, well, this stuff was all written later, The script for Jesus was written later. I don't think so. Yeah, very interesting. So what else was happening around this time? So have you ever heard of Phoenicia? They show up in the scriptures. Phoenicia, the Phoenicians were these people right here above Jerusalem, right here above Judea, right along the coast. These are the Phoenicians. One of their main cities was Tyre. We talked a little bit about that with Alexander. Anybody remember what happened to Tyre when Alexander came through?
Used to be an island.
Used to be an island. Now it's a peninsula. Yeah, he built an isthmus out there because they wouldn't surrender. He built an isthmus out and destroyed the place and killed about a third of them, and the other 2/3 went into slavery. But anyway, these are the Phoenicians. If you ever hear about them, that's who they are. But a long time before that, they were seafaring peoples, and they went out and set up colonies all along the underbelly of the Mediterranean here. Now you got Rome up here, right? Rome's ascending, so they're not dumb enough to do that. What they do is they go along and they set up colonies all along here. And by about 300 BC or so, they become what's known as Carthage. Anybody ever hear of Carthage? The Carthaginians were ancient Phoenician peoples. They were people that came from this Phoenician colonization movement that probably lasted for 1,000 years. For a long time. Think about that. Think about you might be at 700 or 800 BC and you're in an old rickety wooden boat going out across the Mediterranean. Because this was all desert back here, right? And besides that, you're not going to go through here. Here's Egypt, right? Here's the Libyan desert. So and you got Greece, Macedonia. You're not going to mess with that. So they went all the way around and settled all this area here. And by about 300 BC or so, Carthage was becoming a pretty significant power on the southern side of the Mediterranean. And on the northern side of the Mediterranean was Rome. So you start to see this collision of these two pretty significant powers.
The Phoenicians were also known for a lot of knowledge.
Oh yeah.
They're the ones that had the purple dyes. They were like the technology
Yeah.
top of their
Yeah.
time period.
Yeah, they were. I'm glad you said that. They were known for their dyes,
their dyes
and
and
developing
their
new technology.
Biblos, the word is a Phoenician word actually, because they were into writing as well.
I think there might have been a town in the Phoenician are called Byblos too, or called something
I
like
think
that.
and that's where the writing came from.
Yeah. So this city of Tyre is mentioned quite a bit in the Bible. In fact, the Hiram, the king of Tyre, furnished building materials to Solomon when he was building a temple. That's talked about. Jezebel, you guys ever heard of Jezebel? Queen Jezebel? She was actually the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of Tyre and Sidon. So it looks like these Phoenicians intermarried with, right, remember we talked about, I'm going to marry my daughter off to this king and then I'll have a connection, right? So it looks like that happened. So this Ahab, he marries the daughter of the Phoenician king. We know how that goes. Right? That doesn't go well. But that's who these people are. So by about 300 BC, you have this kind of a balance of power here, where Carthage is strong on the southern part, Rome is gaining strength on the top part. What's going to happen? Interesting watershed moment in history right here. What if Carthage had been able to hold the balance for another couple hundred years? Just another couple hundred years. Would Rome had ever ended up in...
No roads.
May have been no roads, or at least going into Judea, right, going that direction, through Greece and Judea and Asia Minor, yeah. Would Rome have been able to expand with a strong Carthage right here? That's a really good thought, right? Would you have had the Roman infrastructure later on, right? Would you have had, there's something else Rome gave besides infrastructure. What else did they provide that helped the spread of the gospel? There was infrastructure, roads and things like that. What else did they provide? What was a really good thing?
It was basically peace.
Peace, yeah. There's this thing called the Pax Romana. Peace, Roman peace. So, yeah, they achieved peace through the sword, but what you ended up with was one big empire that was at peace, and you could roam all around it. And if you look at the history of our country, you think, okay, there were wars. There was a Civil War at one time, there was a Mexican-American War, there was a Revolutionary War, all these things happened, but what do you have right now as a result of that? You can roam all over the country. You can go from any city, any state, you can go anywhere you want. It's not at war. That's what happened here, right? You had all this conflict, but it gave you a point at which it was stability. And during that point of stability, you could move around. You weren't crossing borders. You were in the same empire.
They
right?
made them citizens.
Some were citizens, yeah.
Yeah, but that gave you that title to do that.
They gave you a little bit more protection, but you could roam around, right?
Right.
So, but before that, you had this détente happening here where you had this, locked in moment. Then it breaks out. In about 270 BC, the Carthaginians enter into a state of warfare with Rome that lasts for quite a while. This goes to about 146 BC. So from 270 to about 146, you've got what's called the Punic Wars. There's 3 separate wars that happen here. And this map just kind of shows you how that all worked out with the movements. You may have heard of Hannibal. He was a Carthaginian leader. He did some crazy stuff. I mean, he scared the daylights out of Rome. I mean, he shows up. Okay, so they're down here. Carthage is right here. It's in modern-day Tunisia. He shows up here with war elephants. And they're like, where did this guy come from? I mean, and he actually he went around, he got all the way down to here. I mean, it was crazy. So really scared. So it looked like these guys might be the ones that end up overthrowing and becoming the great power, right? But in the Third Punic War, Rome finally defeats Carthage and completely and utterly destroys them and basically just, levels the place and it never exists again. So Carthage is destroyed in the final battle of the Third Tunisian War. So as a result of that, you're allowed to have Roman expansion. This is why it's important to understand that. What was the trigger that unlocked it? The Punic Wars unlocked that, right? It allowed Rome then to have almost unfettered expansion in the western part of the Mediterranean. As Carthage is now completely destroyed, there's nobody else out here. And this is by about 100 BC, this is what the Roman Empire looks like. So it's getting dangerously close to the Seleucid Empire, right? What's happening here from 200, if you look at this time frame right here, 270 to about 100, what's happening in Judea? What have we been talking about? What's been happening? The Maccabean Revolt happens right 30, 40 years, 60 years before this. This is So this is all happening dead center in the middle of that, right? You've got the Seleucids and the Ptolemies fighting it out, weakening each other. You've got this area up here is all getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And so over that time, so they're all distracted fighting it out over here, and they're just getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And we've talked about the fact that during some of those Ptolemy-Seleucid wars, the Ptolemies would reach out to Rome and say, "Can you help us out? Can you help us out?" "Sure, I'll help you out." Just inch a little closer. "Sure, I'll help you out." Inch a little closer. Right? Right? And I keep these guys fighting. I'll help one of them. Keep weakening the bigger one, until we're going to see here in a couple of weeks, they just walk into Jerusalem, basically. Because the Seleucids are just done. Yeah? So you have this constant kind of cycle of people reaching out to Rome, because they see Rome getting bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. They keep reaching out and they keep getting closer and getting closer until you have this moment where they are right on the doorstep. I mean, they are in Asia now. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that? Where's Rome coming from here? Any thoughts? It's kind of important to know where these guys came from. That's why we're going to talk about this. Because they're going to show up here in about 40 years. In about 40 years from this period of time, they're going to show up in Jerusalem. And you're like, where did these guys come from? Rome? Are you kidding me? How far away is that? I mean, if we go back and, I don't know if I have it on this map, I have it here. Look how far we're talking here. This is over here. All of a sudden, in about 63 AD, Rome shows up here. How'd they get there? This is how they got there.
Through all the rest of it.
Say that again?
Through all the rest
Through the rest of it. Through these people that couldn't hold it together, you know, that were fighting with each other rather than banding together, right? Carthage came up and kind of gave the opportunity for Rome to get very strong and wealthy. Obviously, by conquering that empire, then they have all that wealth. And something starts to happen over this period of time here. I had it. So this is what's happening in Judea. With all that going on to the west, Judea now, we talked about the Maccabean revolt is somewhat successful. They get control of what is basically Judea here. And about for the next 30 years or so, they just expand and try and reassemble what was once Israel. So you can see it just kind of, you can see the expansion of these different people here, trying to make it bigger and bigger. The Seleucids get weaker and weaker and weaker. The Jews get stronger and stronger and stronger under the Hasmonean dynasty. We talked about that. And so now you have this new kingdom of Israel under the Hasmonean family. And this starts to percolate up some of the important things that are going to happen and that we're going to see and read about in the New Testament. One of them is the Pharisees. The Pharisees come out of this time frame right here, when you've got the Hasmonean, they're somewhat Hellenized, but they're also religious zealots, right? So you've got this cultural tug-of-war going on in Israel. And before this, you had this Sadducee group, which was kind of like a wealthy, aristocratic group that was religious, but they were kind of more aristocrats. And so as a counter to that, this group called the Pharisees emerged, really as kind of a political party, as a counter to the Sadducees. They come during this time frame right here.
Did the Sadducees buy their spot? I'm curious. I kind of heard that. I don't know if that's...
Remember last week you talked about these guys, Jason and Menelaus? Yeah.
So they did kind of buy their... If they were really wealthy, they could literally buy their spot in the government, religious government
Sure.
kind of quote,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, probably. There's a lot of that going on.
So
But then
the Pharisees were like that
the
too?
Pharisees
Or
came
where
around-
they came from?
the Pharisees were they were a political movement to be strict adherence to the Jewish practice and law, because as a counter to all this Hellenization that was going on. So if you had this practice like bribery and things, if that was going on, imagine you're going to have this counter on the religious side. Hey, let's be more pure, right? Let's reject this Hellenization. Let's reject this Greek stuff and get back to our... So that was the major difference. right? It was a pushing back against this idea of assimilating into Greek culture. That's what the Pharisees were all about. So again, during this time period, during this expansion, the Pharisees and the Sadducees acted like political parties. That's they were trying to. Am I saying it right? Sadducees, Pharisees.
Yeah.
Trying to act as influencers on culture, right? If you think about our political parties today, what are they trying to do? Exactly the same thing. I mean, they're trying to either A, get political power and control to drive the political policy, or influence in society, right? Through either, liberalizing it or constricting it, right? I mean, they're all trying to do that. So that's exactly what's happening here. If you look at it, it's very close parallel to what happens today. But this is where these Pharisees came from. And it appears the Sadducees date much farther back. The Sadducee practice goes back to probably when shortly after they had come back from Babylonian captivity and started to reestablish their area. The Sadducee movement came out of that. You're wealthy enough now to build your own aristocracy. A few centuries later, you have a political movement to push back and restore Judaism to its more pure form. So it looks like the Pharisees had a pretty good, idea or practice or behavior back then. But we know, fast forward another 150 years, 100 years to Jesus' time, what had they become? If you were to describe the Pharisees as somebody in Jesus' time, what would you describe it as? Hypocritical, the moral police maybe, right? If you don't do everything the way we say to do, then you're a bad guy. So you see how these kind of things can go so far? It's like we have this movement to try and influence, but then it gets farther and farther where it becomes law. You must behave this way, right? And so you just see how that kind of happened over 150 years or so.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, once they got too much control, they lost the original philosophy within which they were hatched, and it turned into something more of a imposing. What's that? Legalistic. Yeah, exactly.
No matter why you're doing it, you just have to do it.
Right. Don't think about it. Just do it. Right. Yeah. The outward behavior is more important than what's in here. Right. We hear Jesus talk about that a lot. But this is where the Pharisees came from. So already we started to see some interesting things. Where did the Aramaic language come from? Where did the Pharisees come from? Where did the synagogues come from? Where did Greek come from? We saw these things all pop up now during this period of time. Any thoughts or anything to wrap us up?
Drew,
Yes.
back to the 46 to
56?
56, I heard that Bedouin herder with his goats.
Oh, found them? Yeah, that's a story. Yeah. Yeah, that they were discovered by accident, basically. Some goats had wandered up in that area. But these are up on a cliff, so I'm not sure if goats got way up in there. But may have found some that were lower in.
Goats go everywhere they want to.
But that is a story that they were found by a sheep herder. Yeah. Interesting. Good. That's amazing. God led an animal to find that. All right, so next week we're going to start talking about where the downfall of the Hasmoneans and where Herod came from. There's somebody else that pops up in the New Testament. So we're going to figure out who this Herod guy is. So you can see we're getting closer and closer to Jesus' time now. So some characters that we recognize in the New Testament are starting to emerge now. So, thank you very much. We'll see you then. Thanks.